where there were morning callers and daily social events she was expected to attend. But at Rosehaven, the Wimbledon estate, some 7 miles from the city, no one would call on her. No one would know what happened once the doors had closed them in. She had learned to defend herself over the years, even though it infuriated Richard into greater brutality. But the baby, she didn't dare do anything that would increase the violence. How is this my life? What would I give for a second chance to make a different future? Sabrina pressed on her belly to remind herself it was real. She'd reached the halfway point in the pregnancy and had only another 4.5 months to go. Therese had impressed upon Richard the delicate nature of Sabrina's condition, and he'd respected that, refraining from exerting his dominance over her. She'd had a growing hope that this child could change everything, remedy his rage, soften his heart, give them a place to build from so they could have the kind of marriage God intended. She did not expect to be cherished by such a man as Richard, but as the mother of his child, she'd have some security. She could no longer be so easily replaced, and therefore he would not handle her so roughly. Right? Could she still believe that? She had to believe it. She would be a mother, and for the first time since Mamma's death, she would have someone to love her. What would that feel like? What would it mean to hold her own child in her arms? A part of her, a part of Mamma, a future. 4.5 more months. A giggle from the other side of the hedge froze the air in her lungs. A male laugh, low and seductive, closely followed, and Sabrina closed her eyes as though that could hide her. There had been several numbers left in the programme when she'd slipped into the garden, and she'd thought she'd have time to compose herself before returning in time for the final performance. How would she explain herself, hiding behind a wall of roses, alone in the dark? Tears of frustration and anticipated embarrassment pricked the backs of her eyes. She nearly gave in to them, except then she would rejoin the party with puffy eyes that would give away her distress. She looked around for better cover when a man suddenly came into view. He was walking backward through the archway, leading a woman by her gloved hand toward the dark corner where Sabrina had sought her own refuge. He stepped back far enough that he faced Sabrina, her back against the foliage that blocked her from the view of his companion. He stumbled a step before coming to a stop. The man pulled his eyebrows together in confusion. "Please," she prayed, widening her eyes and shaking her head slightly, to emphasize how much she needed his help to remain unseen. "Please." "I think there must be a better corner," the man said. He held Sabrina's eyes another moment before shifting his gaze to the woman he'd kept, literally at arm's length. He stepped back toward the house, and their laughter moved away with their voices until Sabrina was alone again. Sabrina took a shaky breath, sending a grateful prayer to the heavens for the stranger having spared her. If only she could orchestrate a means to be spared from Richard. Perhaps if she were particularly attentive and complimentary for the rest of the evening, his anger would cool by the time they returned home. She could praise his hunting last week. He'd brought home 3 pheasants in only 1 morning. Maybe if he drank enough, he would forget his anger. The baby's movement had become stronger this week. If he could feel it, perhaps both she and their child would become more human to him, more real. Maybe he would see both of them as worthy of his protection. As confidently as she could, she stepped away from the wall of roses and looked around the empty garden. The notes of a flute carried from the back doors of the music room as she brushed down her dress and straightened her spine. She had taken only a few steps toward the house when a man stepped into her path. She put a hand to her mouth to keep from screaming, then lowered it as she recognized him as the one whose tryst she'd interrupted. He put his hand on her arm and steered her back behind the roses. Her heart was in her throat. If Richard learned she was in the garden with a man... "Are you all right, madam?" She blinked at him. "What? Are you all right? When I came upon you a bit ago, you looked terrified." The man's honest concern brought tears to her eyes, and she tried to swallow the lump in her throat so she could assure him she was fine. Except she wasn't fine. Her plans to deflect Richard's anger might not work. They might return to Wimbledon this very night. "May I?"